Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're heading to the cold, windswept coast of Portsmouth, Maine, where a mystery from 1997 still sends chills down the spine of anyone who remembers it. It's a story about a voice in the dark, a phantom caller, and a disappearance that left an entire town asking what happened in the silence of a winter storm. In the dead of winter, the coastal towns of Maine can feel incredibly isolated. The wind howls, and the ocean feels like a vast, empty expanse. For the night owls, the lonely drivers, and the fishermen far out at sea, there was one constant, comforting presence: Laura Jensen, the host of the night show on WPKM radio 98.3 FM. Laura wasn't famous. She wasn't a shock jock or a celebrity. She was just real. Listeners said she had a voice that could make 2 a.m. feel like home. She'd play familiar songs, tell gentle stories, and connect with people during the loneliest hours. She was a steady, warm presence in the overwhelming darkness. Born and raised in Portland, Laura had always been captivated by the power of sound. After years of working her way up through small-town radio, she finally landed her dream job hosting the night show. It was quiet, solitary work, just her, the glowing console, a mug of black coffee, and the red on-air sign that signaled she was live. For years, this was her routine, a predictable rhythm that soothed thousands. But on the night of March 8, 1997, that rhythm was broken. A brutal snowstorm had paralyzed the region. Roads were closed, power lines were down, and the world outside the station was a blanket of white. That evening, something was different about Laura. The station's janitor, Mark Halstead, was the last person to see her. He later told investigators that she looked pale and distracted, as if she hadn't slept for days. She was clutching a manila envelope under her arm. When he asked if she was all right, she gave him a weak, distant smile and said, "Just something I found in the archives, nothing important." Security footage confirmed she arrived at 10:56 p.m. Her old blue Volvo pulled into the otherwise empty lot. She entered the station alone. No one else was seen entering or leaving the building after her. At precisely 11:03 p.m., the on-air light blinked red. The night show began, but right from the start, her loyal listeners could tell something was wrong. Her first words were unusually hesitant. "Good evening, it's Laura," she began. "I hope you're all staying warm tonight. The snow's still coming down out there. And well, I've got something different for you all." The familiar warmth in her voice was replaced by a nervous, brittle edge. She played a Fleetwood Mac song, then tried to ease into her usual storytelling, but there were strange pauses, moments of dead air that felt heavy and unsettling. It was as if she was listening for something in the studio with her, something her audience couldn't hear. Then, at 11:48 p.m., a call came through. The line crackled with heavy static, a sound not unusual during a storm. But the voice that emerged from the static was anything but normal. It was a man whispering, his words nearly lost in the noise. Listeners who were tuned in said they heard Laura gasp. Her breath hitched. The man's whisper was faint, but his message was chillingly clear. "You shouldn't have read it." Laura let out a shaky, nervous laugh, trying to play it off as a prank call. She quickly cut the caller off, and perhaps instinctively, put on another Fleetwood Mac song, Dreams. It was the last song she ever played. After that track ended, there was nothing. No more music, no more stories, no more of Laura's comforting voice. At 2:07 a.m., the night show officially went off the air. But it hadn't ended with its usual outro, it just stopped. The broadcast was replaced by the hiss of pure static, an empty channel that echoed the silence of the snow-covered town. The static continued for hours, an unnerving void where Laura's voice should have been. When the morning crew arrived the next day, they walked into a scene frozen in time. Laura's coat was still draped over the back of her studio chair. Her half-full mug of coffee was still warm to the touch. Her car keys and wallet were on the console, and her Volvo was still parked outside, now covered in a thick layer of fresh snow. She was simply gone. But there was one thing that was terribly out of place. On the soundboard, right where she would have been sitting, lay the manila envelope the janitor had seen her carrying. It was torn open. Inside there was only a single item, a Polaroid photograph. The photo showed the WPKM radio studio taken from the outside, looking in through the main window at night. The room was empty, just as it should have been. But when investigators looked closer, they saw something in the reflection on the glass. Something faint, almost lost in the grainy texture of the film. It was a shadow, a figure standing in the dark, watching the empty studio. At first glance, it looked like Laura, but her eyes were closed, and her expression was one of terror. The photo seemed to capture her from the outside, but also something else, a reflection of her own fear, or maybe a reflection of what was waiting for her in the darkness. To this day, Laura Jensen has never been found. The police investigated the mysterious caller, but the call was untraceable, lost in the storm's interference. They analyzed the photograph, but it offered no clues, only more questions. Who took the picture? What was in the manila envelope that the caller warned her not to read? And how did she vanish from a locked radio station in the middle of a blizzard, leaving everything behind? Some believe the caller was a stalker who finally made his move. Others whisper about something more supernatural, that Laura stumbled upon a cursed object in the station's archives, something that brought a malevolent entity to her door. The story of Laura Jensen became a local legend, a ghost story told in hushed tones. The voice that once made the AM feel like home had become a symbol of an eternal, unanswered silence. Her last broadcast, ending with the haunting lyrics of dreams and fading into static, serves as a chilling final chapter to the mystery of the midnight host, who simply disappeared into the night. What do you guys think happened to Laura Jensen? Is it a human threat, or did she uncover something she was never meant to find? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. Stay safe out there. The morning sun did little to warm the small coastal town of Portsmouth, Maine. A nervous energy buzzed through the streets, thicker than the sea mist. Everyone was talking about it the night show, the chilling silence that had swallowed it whole, right in the middle of a live broadcast. At the WPKM building, the scene was grim. Yellow police tape crisscrossed the entrance, a stark warning against the gray facade. Officers moved with practiced solemnity, carrying evidence bags that held fragments of a story no one yet understood. The storm that had raged the night before was gone, but the quiet it left behind felt unnatural, heavy. Detective Raymond Cole stepped out of his car at precisely 8:14 a.m. At 52, with 30 years etched into the lines around his eyes, he'd seen more than his share of Portsmouth's secrets. He wasn't a late-night radio listener, but he knew Laura Jensen. Of course he did. In a town this size, everyone knew Laura. He remembered her from a charity event last spring, her easy laugh, the genuine kindness that seemed to radiate from her. The thought of her name on a missing persons report felt deeply wrong. Pushing through the station doors, the first thing that hit him was the stillness. The on-air light, a familiar beacon in the night, was dark. A low, persistent hum from an old transmitter rack was the only sound, a ghost of the life that usually filled this room. Then he saw it. On the broadcast desk, next to a torn envelope he'd been briefed on, lay Laura's headset. It was broken. One ear cup had been snapped clean off, a detail that screamed violence, a struggle. The station logs were the first piece of the puzzle. Laura had played 3 songs before the transmission died, but the audio recordings held something more sinister. Tucked between the music, almost lost in the background noise, were other sounds, faint rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on a pane of glass. And then a whisper. It was so soft, it was almost indistinguishable from the static. "Do you remember me, Laura?" The technicians were quick to offer a logical explanation. Interference from a stray CB radio signal, maybe a ham radio enthusiast. But Cole's gut told him otherwise. This felt personal. It felt intentional. The team scrambled to trace the broadcast's backup feed. There was a glimmer of hope, an emergency server that should have recorded everything. But when they pulled up the archive, their hope dissolved. The final 4 minutes of Laura's show were gone, wiped, overwritten by a wall of blank, hissing static. Only one tiny fragment survived the digital purge, a sliver of her voice, panicked and raw. "If anyone's out there, I think someone's," and then nothing. The tape just cuts, leaving an endless, terrifying void. Cole's next stop was Mark Halstead, the station janitor. The last person known to have seen Laura, Mark, looking pale and shaken, repeated his story for the third time. She was off, anxious. She kept looking out the window into the storm, like she was waiting for someone. Like she was scared they'd show up. Cole held up an evidence bag containing the torn envelope. "What about this? Did you see her with it?" Mark shook his head, his eyes wide. "She said she found it, down in the archives. That's impossible. No one's been in that room for years. It's a tomb down there." A tomb. The word hung in the air. Cole knew he had to see for himself. He descended the narrow stairs into the station's basement. The air was thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and decaying paper, the scent of forgotten time. Rows upon rows of old reel-to-reel tapes lined the shelves, a library of ghosts from decades of radio. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom. Landing on a cardboard box with faded ink scrawled across the side, "The Night Show 1984. Curiosity piqued. He lifted the lid.
Ow.
Inside were dozens of tapes, but one was out of place. It was sitting right in the playback deck of an old, dust-covered machine, as if someone had just been listening to it. The date handwritten on the label sent a shiver down his spine. March 8th, 1984. With a deep breath, Cole threaded the tape and pressed play. Static hissed from the speakers. And then, a voice emerged. A woman's voice, unsettlingly familiar. "Good evening, listeners, it's Laura." Cole froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was impossible. Laura Jensen wasn't even born in 1984. Yet the voice continued, a perfect match, the same tone, same cadence, even the same small nervous laugh Laura always gave before introducing a new song. He listened, a cold dread creeping over him. The recording played for several minutes, a phantom broadcast from a past that shouldn't exist. It ended abruptly, not with static, but with a faint knock on a studio door, followed by a man's voice, low and chilling. "Told you we'd meet again." Cole ejected the tape, his hand trembling slightly. As the plastic reel caught the light, he noticed something else. Scratched into the label, so faint it was almost invisible under the layers of dust, was a warning. 5 words. "Do not play after midnight." That evening, the local news led with the story. Radio host disappears during live broadcast. The whole town was looking for Laura Jensen. But sitting alone in his office, Detective Cole wasn't just investigating a disappearance. He was confronting the impossible, because he'd found one more thing in that dusty archive room. The checkout slip for that 1984 tape. It had been signed out from storage on March 7th, 1997, the day before Laura vanished. The signature on the checkout slip in clear, familiar handwriting was Laura Jensen's. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoy diving into mysteries like this, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what comes next. See you in the next video. It was the night after Evelyn's broadcast vanished, and the small town of Cold Creek, Nevada, just felt wrong. The silence was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Everyone who had been listening that night said the same thing when they turned their radios back on. They could still hear her, a ghost in the static. Some heard her whispering names, others swore she was crying. One old trucker, a regular on the overnight route, said he heard her laughing, a sound that chilled him to the bone. Her producer, Mark Jensen, hadn't slept a wink. As the first rays of sun broke over the desert, he found himself driving to the radio station. It was a lonely, bunker-like building at the very edge of town, a place that felt forgotten even when it was bustling. Evelyn's car was still there, parked neatly under a flickering streetlight. The keys were still in the ignition, and the driver's side door was left slightly ajar, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Mark pushed open the station door, and the smell of burnt dust and old coffee hit him immediately. The on-air sign was still glowing a faint, defiant red, even though the main power switch was off. At her desk, a steaming mug of coffee sat right next to her microphone. Half empty, but still warm, as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. But Evelyn was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no footprints, nothing to suggest she hadn't just evaporated into thin air. It was a perfect, impossible scene. Mark's hands trembled as he queued up the recording from the previous night. He had to know what happened. For the first 40 minutes, everything was normal. Evelyn's calm, familiar voice filled the control room, reading off song requests and giving the late-night weather report. She was a comforting presence for the lonely souls of the desert night. But then, at exactly 12:03 a.m., the static started. It was faint at first, like distant storm interference, but it grew louder, more insistent, as if it was crawling closer. He could hear Evelyn's voice falter. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a tremor of fear. "If anyone's still listening," she began, her voice tight, "please, don't look at the lights outside." Then nothing. Just dead air. A few seconds later, the microphone picked up her breathing, slow, shaky, terrified. She whispered again, so faintly Mark had to turn the volume all the way up. "It's not outside, it's inside." And then came a sound that Mark would never forget. A sound no one could ever explain. It was like a long, distorted exhale, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the speakers, followed by the soft, final thud of her microphone hitting the floor. And that was it. The tape ended. The silence that followed was more deafening than any noise. Mark, desperate for answers, tried to rewind and play the tape again, but this time it was blank. There was nothing but a soft, looping hiss. The recording, like Evelyn, had simply vanished. A few nights later, the strange occurrences began. Locals, huddled in their homes against the desert chill, started hearing it again. Their radios would crackle to life at exactly 12:03 a.m. No one was at the station. No one was broadcasting. But Evelyn's voice returned, a phantom on the airwaves, whispering the same chilling words, over and over. "Don't look at the lights." Today, the radio station in Cold Creek stands abandoned, but the legend lives on. They say that every October, when the desert wind howls across the valley, radios come alive on their own, even those with no power, no batteries. And if you listen closely, you can hear her. Somewhere deep within the static, Evelyn's voice is still calling out from the darkness. A forever broadcast from a station that no longer exists. A warning from a ghost trapped between the frequencies. What do you think happened to Evelyn? Was it something from the sky? Or something that was already hiding in the shadows of that lonely station? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy mysteries like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Stay safe out there. When Mark Jensen finally set foot back in Cold Creek, the town was already whispering about Evelyn. Her name was a ghost on everyone's lips, spoken in hushed tones, if at all. Some folks just clammed up, avoiding the old WPKM radio station like it was cursed. Others, their voices trembling, swore they'd seen shadows flitting around the transmitter tower after dark faint, human shapes that would dissolve into nothing if you got too close. But Mark couldn't afford to look away. He had to know what happened. The chilling tape, the eerily silent studio, the way people just vanished. He needed answers. His first stop was the WPKM archive room. It was a small, musty space, packed with reel-to-reel tapes going back decades. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light as he sifted through boxes from the 70s and 80s. Most of it was mundane old interviews, public service announcements. But then, one box caught his eye. It was faded cardboard, labeled Emergency Broadcasts, 1989, 1990. Inside were dozens of tapes, but one stood out. Scrawled across it in Evelyn's familiar handwriting were for chilling words, "Do not play after midnight." His heart hammered against his ribs as he threaded the tape onto an old player. The machine hissed to life, filling the room with static. And then a voice cut through the noise. It was a woman's voice, calm, steady, but threaded with pure, undiluted fear. It was Evelyn. "If anyone can hear this, it's happening again. I don't know why, but the signal is alive. The lights, the hum, it's all connected. I think someone has been watching me." And just like that, the tape clicked off, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He sat back, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. This was more than just a missing person case. This was a pattern, one that stretched back decades. He took his findings to Sheriff Lacey, a stoic woman who'd seen her fair share of strange things in her 20 years on the force. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. Reluctantly, she confirmed his fears. There was a history of disappearances linked to that station, to its specific frequencies, going back almost 30 years. Each victim was a late-night host. And every single disappearance happened on a night when an unusual, untraceable radio signal was broadcast right around midnight. Driven by a new sense of urgency, Mark dove back into the archives, cross-referencing the old tapes with the recent events. He unearthed something truly disturbing. The previous hosts who had vanished all shared eerily similar traits. They were quiet, meticulous, almost obsessively detail-oriented, and they had all kept the same type of journal, filled with notes about strange noises, inexplicable lights outside the station, and the persistent, unnerving feeling of being followed. That night, he returned to the station. The transmitter tower stood like a silent, skeletal giant against the dark sky, its red light blinking like a distant, lonely eye. He set up his recorder, the silence of the studio pressing in on him, and waited. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. 12:01, 12:02. Then, at 12:03 a.m., it began. Static flooded his headphones. A low resonant hum vibrated through the floor, and then he heard it. Evelyn's voice, a desperate whisper from the ether. "It's not over. It's in the wires. It's watching. Always watching." As he listened, Mark noticed something strange. The hum wasn't just random noise. It had a rhythm, a cadence. It was like a code, a message hidden deep within the static. He hit record, determined to decipher it. There were repeating patterns, sequences of numbers. It was almost as if Evelyn was trying to communicate with him from beyond. The next day, he started interviewing the townspeople who lived near the broadcast tower. An elderly man named Henry Tolman, his eyes wide with decades-old fear, told him a story that sent a shiver down his spine. He claimed he'd seen a figure climbing the tower in the dead of night years ago. But it wasn't just Evelyn. It was a shadowy figure, something that seemed to move through solid walls as if they weren't there. Later, Mark managed to track down Evelyn's personal notes. Her journal entries painted a terrifying picture. She wrote about unmarked vans parked outside her apartment for hours on end, the sound of footsteps echoing in an empty hallway, and the chilling certainty that someone, or something, had been listening to her every word for months before she vanished. But the most disturbing entry was the last one. It read, "I think the signal itself is alive. Every time I broadcast, it responds. I am afraid it is calling someone else, and soon they will answer." By the end of the night, standing alone in the cold, the pattern was terrifyingly clear. Evelyn's disappearance wasn't a random act. The station, the signal, the tapes, the vanishing zit was all connected. And whoever, or whatever, was controlling it had been lying in wait dormant for someone just like him to start paying attention. He knew what he had to do, had to find the rest of the missing recordings, decode the hidden signals in the static, and trace this malevolent broadcast to its source before another host was taken. As he left the station, the air in Cold Creek felt degrees colder. The faint hum from the tower seemed to follow him all the way home, and in the distance, carried on the night wind. The static-laden whispers of Evelyn's voice drifted through the sleeping town once more. "Help me, before it's too late." Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the mystery of Cold Creek. If you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content. I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. The morning after the warning, I couldn't shake the voice I'd heard over the radio. "Stop, or she will never be found." It just echoed in my mind over and over again. I hadn't told anyone about my little side investigation yet. Not the police, not my coworkers at WPKM radio. A gut feeling told me that if I did, the truth, and maybe even I, would just vanish. By noon, I had managed to map out all the coordinates hidden within the static. 7 points, all scattered around the outskirts of my town, Cold Creek, Arizona. The first one led me to this old abandoned diner on Route 17. It's been shuttered since the 80s, I think. Its neon sign was still hanging there, half lit, just spelling out the word "eat." Inside, dust was everywhere, a thick gray blanket over every surface. But there was this faint hum of electricity still running through the walls, almost like the building was breathing. Behind the counter, I found an old radio transmitter. its dials glowing faintly in the dim light. I hesitated for a second, then turned the main knob. The room filled with static, and then a woman's voice. "If you're hearing this, you found me." It was Evelyn. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. The message continued, but it was choppy, skipping and repeating like a corrupted audio file. They used me. The frequency isn't just sound. It's a transmission of thought. I'm trapped in the signal, Mark. Shut it down before, and just like that, the voice cut off. The static screamed for a moment, then total silence. My heart was racing. I ripped the transmitter S cables out of the wall and shoved the whole unit into my bag. It had to be connected. The other coordinates, they must lead to more transmitters, more pieces of the puzzle. I spent the rest of the day chasing them down. An old church basement, a disused sheriff's station, even a farmhouse that had burned to the ground years ago. Each location had the same setup, a hidden transmitter, and each one replayed a different fragment of Evelyn's last broadcast. It was like she was leaving me breadcrumbs. By the time I reached the last location, night had fallen. It was an abandoned radio relay tower, way out in the desert. Its red lights blinked slowly against the horizon, like a lonely sentinel marking the edge of civilization. Underneath the tower, in a small control shed, I found something even stranger. A reel-to-reel recorder, and it was still running, spooling the same tape endlessly. I leaned in closer to read the label. It said WPKM, Emergency Broadcast -2019. That couldn't be right. Evelyn had only disappeared 6 months ago in 2024. Something was very, very wrong here. I took a deep breath and pressed the play button. The tape hissed to life, and then I heard a voice. My voice. "This is Mark Jensen reporting from WPKM Cold Creek. Evelyn, if you can hear me, I think I finally understand." My hands started to tremble. I had never recorded that. I'd never said those words. I looked at the timestamp on the tape. November 6th, 2025, 2 weeks from now. Suddenly, the reel jammed. The lights in the shed flickered violently. My radio scanner went haywire, the signal interference spiking and flooding the tiny space with a piercing hum. From the corner of the room, the static speaker on the transmitter I brought with me crackled again. Evelyn's voice returned, but it was different this time. Calm, distant, almost resigned. "You were never supposed to find this, Mark. The signal doesn't stop. It replaces." The air in the shed grew heavy, vibrating with some kind of invisible force. Every radio in the shed, the one I brought, the ones collecting dust on the shelves, they all turned on by themselves. All broadcasting the same phrase, over and over again. Transmission complete. I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The desert was silent except for the low hum of the tower. I looked back at the shed, and in the dark window I saw my own reflection. But it wasn't moving the way I was. I blinked, and my reflection, it smiled back at me. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was a bit of a different story, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button, and if you're new here, consider subscribing for more content like this. It really helps the channel out. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. The wind howled through Cold Creek that night, a mournful sound that rattled the old windows of Mark Jensen's apartment. He couldn't sleep. The events of the past week churned in his mind, a relentless cycle of anxiety and questions. Evelyn's disappearance, the strange crackling signals that haunted the airwaves, the musty archival tapes that whispered secrets from decades past. Every time he drifted towards sleep, her voice would break through the static in his head, a desperate plea, "Help me." Before it's too late, sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. By sunrise, Mark was already pulling up to the station. The WPKM building felt colder than usual, the air thick with the smell of dust and aging electronics. He hauled in his gear, a laptop, a set of portable recorders, and a notepad overflowing with frantic notes. He had to make sense of it all. He had to find her. He started with the signal recordings from the past few nights, laying them out on the audio timeline. He saw it. The patterns were intricate, deliberate. They weren't random noise at all. There were rhythms, sequences, even faint numbers, hidden deep within the static. It was a code. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, Mark began cross-referencing these numbers with the station's old archives. A chill snaked down his spine as the truth emerged. The sequence of numbers matched the exact timestamps of every known disappearance ever linked to the station, going back decades. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a blueprint. Someone or something had been orchestrating this for years. As he dug deeper, piecing the fragments together, a terrifying realization struck him. The signals weren't just one-way broadcasts. They seemed to be interactive. He found notes from previous hosts, describing how the signal would respond when they spoke into the microphone. At first it was subtlest, slight distortion, a momentary pause, a whispered echo. But over time, the responses grew more direct, more intelligent, sometimes even mimicking the host's own voice. She called it the living frequency. Determined to trace its source, Mark went to work, transforming the broadcast booth into a command center. He set up multiple microphones to capture audio from every angle, linked several recording devices to his laptop, and even constructed a makeshift Faraday cage around the main console, hoping to isolate the mysterious signals. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, he settled in for his first full night of observation. The clock ticked past midnight. At exactly 12:03 a.m., it began. The familiar static returned, starting as a soft crackle before swelling into a low, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Mark's recorders sprang to life, capturing the faint whispers riding on the frequency. He heard fragments of Evelyn's voice, tangled with others, some male, some female, all distorted and desperate. "I warned you, they're coming. Don't broadcast tonight. Follow the pattern. Follow the pattern." Mark frantically recorded everything, pausing only to scribble down the numerical sequences embedded in the rhythmic pulses. It finally clicked. Each number corresponded to a specific, long-forgotten broadcast frequency. The signals weren't just coming from the WPKM tower. They were a network, traveling across the town, across the state, using old, dead airwaves. By 1:30 a.m., exhaustion was a heavy weight on his eyelids. He was about to pack it in when he noticed a flicker of light outside the station window, near the old transmitter tower. It wasn't a reflection. It was pulsing in perfect rhythm with the static on his monitors. His heart pounded against his ribs. Grabbing a heavy flashlight, Mark pushed the station door open and stepped out into the cold night air. The tower loomed over him, a skeletal silhouette against the starry sky. As he got closer, the static in his headphones grew louder, more aggressive, almost unbearable. And then he heard distinct footsteps crunching on the gravel around the tower's base. He whipped the flashlight beam around. Nothing. No one was there. Only the immense shadow of the tower stretching across the desert floor. He had to see for himself. He began the long climb up the tower's service ladder. On the platform, he scanned the area. The main antenna at the very top was twisted slightly, as if it had been tampered with. He followed the old wiring, his fingers tracing the cold metal, and found it. A hidden junction box, crudely installed. Something that was never in the station's original schematics. He pried it open. Inside, dozens of wires snaked around old, glowing radio tubes, all feeding into a small, modified transmitter. A wave of dread washed over him. Someone had rebuilt the original frequency system, mirroring the design from decades ago. Someone wanted this signal to stay alive. Back inside the relative safety of the station, he replayed Evelyn's final recordings. Her voice, once a source of pain, now felt like a guide, a map left just for him. "Follow the sequence," she had whispered. "If you find the number, you'll see. You'll see them." Mark's eyes widened. He looked back at his notepad. The numbers weren't just frequencies, they were coordinates. Each number corresponded to a physical location around Cold Creek, a house, a warehouse, a long-abandoned building. It was a hidden network, not of radio waves, but of places, connected by this living frequency. Whoever had taken Evelyn, they had left him clues. Hours blurred together as Mark worked, documenting every wire, every frequency, every whispered word. He felt closer than ever to understanding the living frequency, to discovering where Evelyn had gone, and why these signals refused to die. But as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, the radio crackled one last time. A distorted, garbled voice sliced through the static, louder and clearer than anything he had heard before. "Stop, or she will never be found." Mark froze, his blood turning to ice. His recorder captured it perfectly. His stomach sank. This was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was a direct warning. And he knew with chilling certainty that somewhere in the shadows beyond Cold Creek, someone or something was watching his every move. Thanks so much for joining me on this chilling investigation. If you're hooked and want to find out what happens to Mark and Evelyn, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of the story. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there. The desert night was unusually still. I stood at the base of the WPKM tower, this colossal structure stretching into the black sky like a sentinel of something ancient. The wind whispered through the sand, carrying faint murmurs from radios scattered across Cold Creek. Every old transistor, every forgotten receiver, buzzed to life, filling the air with static. And Evelyn's voice. "Mark, you're here. I can hear you." Her words echoed through the desert, fragmented yet unmistakable. My heart hammered against my ribs. For months, I had followed codes, numbers embedded in static, and strange signals that no one else could detect. I had deciphered Evelyn's cryptic notes, mapped the coordinates hidden in decades of tapes, and now the culmination of my obsessive search lay before me. The climb up the tower was slower than I expected. Every metal step groaned under my weight, sand swirling against my boots. The wind grew stronger the higher I went, cutting at my face and filling my ears with an almost musical hum. But I couldn't stop. Evelyn's warnings, her pleas, her fear, they all wrapped around me like a tether I couldn't break. At the top, the main console pulsed with life. Wires coiled around old tubes, blinking in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Reels spun endlessly, each one carrying fragments of broadcasts from years gone by. My fingers trembled as I traced them, realizing with a shiver, each reel wasn't just a recording. It was a memory, a fragment of a lost host trapped within the signal. I pressed a button on the console. Static filled the air, morphing into voices. Evelyn's and hosts from decades past, all distorted yet painfully clear. The voices overlapped, layering themselves into a cacophony that vibrated through my chest. "You were never supposed to find this. It's alive. Always watching. Help, please." My mind spun. The signal wasn't just a machine. It was conscious. It observed, it absorbed, and it interacted. Every host who had ever spoken into the microphone before me had become part of it. Evelyn was alive inside it. Suddenly the wind shifted. Shadows flickered across the desert floor. A faint glow emerged from the control console, illuminating the twisted wires and reels in a ghostly light. I realized the frequency was calling to me, wanted me to join. "Mark, you must decide." Her voice was calm, almost serene now. "Step in, or walk away and never hear me again." My body felt heavy, as though the desert itself was holding me back. But I couldn't leave her trapped. I approached the console, heart pounding, every nerve screaming in protest. The static around me thickened, becoming a tangible pressure wrapping around my limbs. The voices of past hosts grew louder, pleading, whispering, crying. I reached for the reel, and in that instant the tower seemed to inhale. Light, sound, and vibration swirled around me. My surroundings fractured, reality bending. The desert, the tower, the sand, the stars all merged into a kaleidoscope of sensation. "Welcome, new host." I felt my consciousness being pulled apart, spread thin across the wires and frequencies. Yet amidst the chaos, I heard Evelyn clearly. "Thank you for finally joining me." I could feel her presence within the signal. Every fear, every whisper, every cry of the lost hosts intertwined with my own mind. It was terrifying and beautiful. I understood then, the signal wasn't evil. It wasn't alive in a traditional sense. It was a prison, a web of sound and memory that preserved those it claimed. My last thought before surrendering fully was of the town below, oblivious, silent, unaware that the air they breathed carried the voices of the missing. I felt myself dissolve, my consciousness merging with Evelyn's and countless others, each voice a thread in the living frequency. Morning came to Cold Creek. The tower stood silent, inert to anyone who approached. Locals went about their day, ignorant of the entity lingering above them. Radios sat dormant. But those brave enough to tune in at 12:03 a.m. heard whispers in the static. The voices of the missing, layered and intertwined, echoed faintly through the desert air. I am here. Always we are here. Waiting, the frequency pulsed softly, patient, unending, eternally hungry for the next voice. Evelyn's voice was there, and my voice had joined it. The legacy of those who vanished long ago lived on, suspended between reality and signal. Cold Creek had returned to normal in appearance, but anyone who listened closely would sense the unseen. A subtle, unexplainable hum, a distorted whisper, a memory trapped in sound, forever waiting. Evelyn, myself, and countless others were gonna yet not gone. Our existence had become the signal itself, a haunting, eternal broadcast that no one could escape. It's a warning to those who dare chase mysteries into the static. Somewhere deep within the wires, the frequency waits, waiting for the next voice, waiting for the next soul who will hear it and never leave. Thank you so much for watching. If you were captivated by this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the static. We'll see you in the next one.